Okay, well, let me begin. My name is Jamie Welch Donahue, and I'm the Director of Communications at William & Mary Law School. And tonight's panel is for prospective students on studying election law at William & Mary. I'm very delighted to welcome our panelists tonight. Let me do some brief introductions. Professor Rebecca Green is Associate Professor of Law and Co-Director of the Election Law Program. The Election Law Program is a joint project of William & Mary Law School and the National Center for State Courts. Professor Green's research interests focus on the intersection of privacy law and elections, most recently in scholarship on election observation, election surveillance, and redistricting transparency. She teaches courses on election law, redistricting and geographic information systems, privacy law, and an alternative dispute resolution. Numerous media have called upon Professor Green for her expert commentary. In 2022 alone, she has been quoted by ABC News, C-SPAN, NPR, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Last December, she briefed media on redistricting in the United States as part of the Washington Foreign Press Center's Understanding America series. Drew Marvel is a 2020 graduate of William & Mary Law School and earned his bachelor's degree in political science and government from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He is Associate Counsel for Fair Lines America, Inc. I hope Drew will tell us more about his internship experience in election law tonight. He has worked at the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Virginia Department of Elections, and most recently at the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Also joining us tonight are two of our students who serve as officers of our Student Election Law Society, Blair Page and Gray Whitsett. Blair is a second-year law student who came to us from Hampden-Sydney College, where he majored in history. Following his first year of law school, he interned at the Campaign Legal Center in Washington, D.C. In addition to serving as an officer of our Election Law Society, he is on the staff of the William & Mary Journal of Race, Gender, and Social Justice. Gray is also a second-year law student. I hope I got that right. Gray is also a second-year law student. He studied political science and government at Center College and holds a Master's of Public Administration from Louisiana State University. In addition to serving as an officer of the Election Law Society, he is a staff member of the William & Mary Environmental Law and Policy Review and an election law fellow. Well, welcome everyone. I think to start off, I will call upon Professor Green and our panelists to just give a brief introduction about the election law program at William & Mary and our Election Law Society.
Well, I'll start and maybe just say a few things, but I'd love for the students to share more about what they do. So the election law program at William & Mary started in 2005 as a joint project with the National Center for State Courts, which is right next door to us in Williamsburg, Virginia. And the National Center for State Courts is sort of the glue that binds the state court systems together in the 50 states. They would otherwise, not have any formal way of interacting. And so the National Center, after 2000, started getting a lot of, concerns or hearing a lot of concerns from state courts after the rise of election litigation after the 2000 election between Bush versus Gore. And so they reached out and asked whether the National Center and William & Mary Law School would provide resources to judges deciding election disputes. And of course, that need has only grown as election litigation has exploded, particularly since the 2020 election. So the election law program is a grant-funded project, and I run numerous projects that people on this call could tell you all about. I've tried to involve a lot of students in those projects over the years. And so part of the work is sort of judge facing. So it's providing resources for judges on election dispute topics. But I think I'll sort of shift over to the Election Law Society piece of this. The Election Law Society was a group founded by students in 2009. And it's a very unique organization because it is a bipartisan organization in the truest sense. So typically the leadership of the Election Law Society is one Republican and one Democrat co-presidents, and then there are different partisans working together throughout the organization. So it's not always the case that we have a bipartisan leadership, but it is mostly the case, and it's something that I think is really important to understand about the Election Law Society at William and Mary, which is that it's a place for anybody who's interested in how the law impacts our elections and vice versa, to kind of dig in and learn from whatever political perspective they're starting with. So I think I'll stop there and maybe turn it over to Blair and Ray, who are this year's co-presidents of the Election Law Society, to maybe share their perspective on, what the group is and what they've done with it.
Blair, I'll kind of start off, and you just pick up wherever I leave off. I won't take it all. Yeah, so the society is, of course, the student kind of branch of this, and it is. I'd say first of all, it's a great way to get plugged in with people who have actually kind of made a career out of this. So, like for instance, Mr. Marble, who's joining us today. We do different things like a speaker series, or we bring in typically alumni, but also just like plenty of guests that are in the field. And for me, at least, like I'm just a 2L, hopefully you'll be a 1L here soon enough. It can be really confusing about like, how do I operationalize and actually make a career out of something I say I really care about and then I'm interested in. And so I think the exposure to people who've again, they've gone out and they've kind of done the thing is really, really helpful. And you kind of get to see like what were their summer internships? Where did they work? And you find that like their paths are very diverse. Their experiences are myriad. And I'll speak for myself, but that helps take my temperature down a little bit, that you don't have to come in knowing exactly what you want to do, line up the dominoes and then knock them down perfect. So that has been something that the society has been really great about for me. The only other thing I'll mention is, and it's related to what I just said, but we have a lot of interactions with some high impact people. There's lots of ways that you can get experience with event planning and research and writing. And those experiences are pretty invaluable in law school. The earlier you can start getting that stuff onto a legal resume, and being able to speak like fluently about what you want to do in an interview, the better. And the only way to do that, at least in my experience, is to just do it. And you need to find organizations that give you that ability. And so ELS, that's the short for society that we use here. ELS has been really good in that way. And frankly, not all organizations necessarily offer that, even if they do a lot of good stuff. Blair, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think, something that really draws a lot of folks to the organization is that you can be as involved as you want to be. We have plenty of folks who, they're pretty sure they want to make a career out of this. So they're heavily involved in a lot of things that we do. And there are also some folks who just kind of find it interesting and want to, stay abreast of the issues, around election law. And I think that we offer avenues for, all sorts of people and all sorts of interest levels. And I'll say that, if, for those who, you kind of think you want to do this as a career, I'll just say, at least working in DC over some of my brief time in the election law bar, William and Mary has, just a wonderful reputation. There's, always an alumni you'll find, wherever you are, whether that's a firm or, nonprofit or federal government. And they range, go across the ideological spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, progressives, whatever. And the most important thing, I think, is that they're always willing to help and connect you with someone trying to get you to where you want to go. And then, of course, we have Professor Green, who knows just about everyone. So I think that, whether like I said, we have a ton of things where, if you if this is what you want to do and you want to be, knee deep in election law related material, you can do that. If you just kind of just want to, kind of stay close to it, but you kind of want to do something else, then you can do that as well. And we really have a lot of folks who really place a lot of importance on making sure that everyone feels involved and everyone feels heard. So that's something that I really enjoy about being in ELS, and it certainly makes being in leadership a lot more pleasurable than some of the other clubs we have.
Can I just add one thought, which is that I think what Blair stressed about, having a really active alumni network is really something that sets William and Mary apart. A lot of times I'll talk with election law professors at other schools, and they'll sort of say, yeah, this is all really interesting, but you can't work there's no way to work in this space as a full-time job. And I really reject that perspective. I think we have, a lot of people who, as Blair described them, are gung-ho about the field and have found really interesting ways to plug in and make it their full-time work. And so maybe that's a good segue to maybe have Drew talk a little bit about his experience and progression in law school and after.
Happy to. Hey, everybody. My name is Drew Marvel. I graduated from William and Mary Law School in 2020, and I currently work as the Associate Counsel at Fairlines America. FLA is a nonprofit that's devoted to educating the public about the redistricting process and providing just a wealth of resources for it. So maps, litigation documents, just overall trends and principles and things like that. So yeah, I've been really blessed to get the job that I've had for the last almost 2 years now, and it really is all thanks to Professor Green and the election law program, and being a member of the Election Law Society. I grew up not knowing very much. Like, I knew I wanted to work in this field. I knew I was very passionate about it, but no one in my family really went to college or worked in politics for that matter. So I had no idea, what that career path would even look like, or if one even existed. And my time at William & Mary and at ELS really opened my eyes to just the wealth of possibilities that there were. I really took advantage of my time in law school, of all the different connections, the wealth of connections that Professor Green has, and to get a lot of different internship positions that helped me kind of explore the different facets within the field of election law. So my second year summer, Professor Green helped me get an internship at the National Conference of State Legislatures. I believe she still does that every year for someone involved in this. And you work in their elections and redistricting department, and it's kind of a trial by fire as far as diving into anything and everything involving elections and redistricting at a 50-state, national level. So I really gained just an invaluable amount of knowledge there and experience. And then I came back in my third year, and I tried to coordinate a lot of outside internships with Professor Green's help, which, again, being a member of the Election Law Society really helps, because it shows you have an interest in this and a genuine curiosity and willingness to kind of help and pitch in when you can. So I actually I was able to get an internship with a couple other students in my class at the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. And it was at a time which, after, the 2016 election and all of the, concerns about foreign interference and stuff, there's a lot of happenings going on at the EAC and discussions about election security and stuff. And I was really, really blessed to kind of work there for several months, get to kind of peek behind the window of an agency and see what issues they're really dealing with and how they get to, adapt and respond and assist states in conducting elections. And just kind of being a good resource at the federal level for that. And then kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, I also was able to internship at Virginia's Department of Elections, again, because Professor Green is very friendly with people that work and run those offices, and was able to work there during the Virginia legislative session. And basically, you get the more nuts and bolts of the policy side at the state level, which is where most election law issues, happen. I was able to kind of track different bills that went through the legislature, read through them, analyze them, see if they're actually making the changes that they were intending to do, and advising on possible changes to improve administration and things like that. And all of that experience really is what allowed me to be taken seriously when I was trying to find jobs after graduation. The COVID-19 pandemic really did throw a wrench into things. So my career path, at least in the last year of law school, probably isn't the most typical, especially I really hope so for future law students. But I mean, regardless of the form that it took, the knowledge and experience that I got being a member of Election Law Society and working with Professor Green in the election law program is really what allowed me to get where I'm at, and hopefully, continue to working in this space. I don't know if I've reached the number of years to call it a career yet, but I'm making a good attempt at it so far.
I can just say, well, just by way of follow-up, I think one of the things that is also great about our program is the classes that you're able to take in election law. We have a real focus on not just sort of providing the basic election law course, which I teach, but a number of what we call mini courses, which are 1-credit classes that, basically bring in some kind of a professional, whether it's a person who does lobbying regulation or campaign finance, or we've got someone teaching a class on lawyering a campaign, just these kind of specialized topics. We had a nonprofit campaign finance law course, international election principles class. We've had numerous courses over the years that have exposed students not only to substantive areas of law, but also people practicing in the area that have sort of increased their network and sort of face time with people practicing in the field. So I know Drew took advantage of that heavily, including taking the redistricting and GIS class that I co-teach, which I think was a nice segue into the job that he ended up getting right after the sort of 2020 season started heating up.
Or ever be the most fun class I ever took in any school in my life.
This fall we redistricted Alabama. That was our brief, because it was sort of the Merrill versus Milligan case is sort of what we picked up. And Drew, another time I'll tell you about what happened. It was pretty incredible. This year's crop was interesting.
Please do.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know what other questions you had for us.
Well, Professor Green, what are the some of the career paths available? What sorts of things can someone with a law degree do?
Yeah, so in the election space, there are a variety of different places you can go. So there are, one example are nonprofits. So these are places like the Fair Election Center or the Campaign Legal Center or Common Cause or the ACLU or the Brennan Center. These are groups that are working at various aspects of elections and election reform. Of course, Drew's organization I should have mentioned first. But sort of depending on your interests, there is probably a nonprofit out there that's doing work in that area, and the chances are good that we have a connection in some way with the organization. So certainly nonprofits are one area. Another are federal agencies. We have quite a few people working at the Federal Election Commission, which is a campaign finance organization that it's a sort of a very specialty shop. And we have people who are working with commissioners as associate counsel, and also people working in the policy shop. So federal agencies and then state agencies are actually an interesting place to go work. So we've had students go on to work at state election offices and also in state legislatures, working on committees that do election legislation at the state legislative level. And then we, of course, have lots of students who end up working in firms. So almost every big law firm has a political law group at this point. I think it's fair to say many are sort of stationed in Washington. Others are, capitals around the country typically. But, we have a student I was just texting with today who's at a political law firm in Los Angeles. We have lots of students who are working at political law groups at firms in DC. And that is sort of across the spectrum, everywhere from places like Jones Day and Wiley Ryan, which are typically thought of as Republican firms, to firms that are thought of as Democratic firms like Perkins Coie or the Elias Law Group or Venable or some of the others. So we do have quite an extensive network of people working in the field at this point. And I think that's generally the range of types of positions that people take. I will say that there are some surprising examples and some surprising paths that don't stick out as election jobs. But I remember once we had a student who had taken a lot of election law classes, including campaign finance law, and he interviewed at the National Education Association. And he thought, okay, I took a class in education law. Maybe they're interested in talking to me about practicing in the education space. But they had looked at his resume and they wanted him to help them with their campaign finance, compliance, and lobbying work. And so that ended up being sort of an interesting path. And of course, every big lobbying organization hires attorneys to help them navigate campaign finance laws. So there are lots of interesting kind of compliance angles too that you can take both in the private sector and otherwise. So I think that's kind of the range that comes to mind in terms of what the options are.
If I could hop in here briefly, I mean, I'm a 2L, what do I know? But I find that it gives me some comfort and it gives me some, I guess, some latitude to think critically about what actual jobs can I secure in the short term. One way to think of this is like election law or political law, but I kind of zoom it out and think of it like, all right, so like, what do democracies need? And one thing they definitely need are well-run governments, and every single government institution, state, local, and federal, needs good attorneys that understand the basics of ethics compliance and basic employment stuff, contracts, things like that. And those are really great places to kind of camp out if you don't wind up with something that is strictly political or strictly election law right out. And you're not like off mission by working there. Like if you really, really believe in this and you really want to do this kind of stuff, you can get something at Government Accountability Office. That is an important element of democracy, is making sure that our government officials understand the parameters of their role and their law. And again, like you can do that while you scope out things at the Federal Elections Commission or the Election Assistance Commission, or you need to build some experience and then try another round at nonprofits. I'm someone who likes to really get it right the first time, and like law school doesn't always reward that, I think, at an emotional level. And so I would just say if this is something that you're interested in, but you also have other interests as well, you can kind of do all of that and stay, again, kind of in the right path where you can make a lateral move, you can gain some experience, or you can realize I don't really like this, and you can kind of pivot back to doing something in the political law space. And Professor Green, if you want to complicate that, you should. But that has kind of like, okay, if you think about this as just we want to provide high quality public services, that's sort of a democratic value. And you don't have to necessarily be like politically connected and working on campaigns and read Politico all the time to be legitimate in that space.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Gray. And I think, you can zoom out a lot in terms of thinking about ways to contribute to making our democracy function better. And I'll also say, we've had students who do something totally different than election law. Even though they have an interest in law school, they end up doing something totally different, and they may or may not come back around to election law work. But, part of what I see the function of the election law program being is to graduate, I say this a lot to students, but to graduate students who are democratic citizens and who can work in sort of the democratic space, no matter what type of law they practice. So that's certainly the case.
I think I might add one thing just to kind of add to the list of possibilities. Like when we say kind of election law, it is a very umbrella-ing term because within election law, there's so many different little carve-outs and legal issues that you can actually practice, that you can, touch on all of them, or, just focus on only one. I mean, there's anything from campaign finance work, which is, working with candidates and parties and different entities. There's actual election administration work. So anything from designing ballots, the absentee, ballot and counting processes, anything like that. There's intellectual property issues that come up, especially with campaigning. If someone makes a campaign ad and they have to, use music, there are rights involved there that you have to normally hash out, or could cause issues there. So there's cybersecurity issues now, in the age of election interference and fears about that. There's so many different little subsets within election law, each of which can be their own specialization in its own right. So within it, there's a lot of variety and a lot of different options, even, if you are just generally interested in election law. I didn't even mention redistricting. I do that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, my focus more is on, like the business of politics. What makes a campaign run, what makes an election run. Campaign finance work, contracts, dealing with vendors for, flyers and yard signs and stuff like that, commercials, there's some First Amendment stuff. So, and that's kind of, my focus. So I think it's correct that it's a very, umbrella term, so that, don't think that, if I'm doing political law, I'm doing, reviewing contracts or looking at numbers and reports all day. I mean, you can do that if you want to. And there's plenty of work for that. But, if voting rights is your thing, if redistricting and, things like that, if that's your thing, then there's plenty of work to be done around that as well.
I wanted to circle back to the Election Law Society, and sort of the work that you do here in Williamsburg, whether it be redistricting competitions. From time to time, our students have been involved in Vote Line, and Professor Green, you would know more about this, but our students actually were recruiting other law students across the country as poll workers during the pandemic. Do you want to talk a little bit about that initiative?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll start with that last one. So in 2020, over the summer, when it looked like there was going to be a real issue with finding enough people to work at the polls during the pandemic election in 2020, a group of students got together on the premise that, we looked around and saw medical students, going into hospitals and trying to, provide support using their expertise. And we felt like law students could likewise step up to organize, to help recruit student poll workers in their communities. So it was more of a sort of an attempt to create a network of law students to recruit at their schools, poll workers at their schools. And that's sort of how it started out. And, it was pretty incredible actually in the 2020 election that it was mostly a group called Power the Polls, which is a group that is run by an organization called the Fair Election Center. They were really able to just unleash a massive campaign to recruit poll workers, and the fears that everyone had that enough people wouldn't step forward didn't materialize in 2020. And so the project Alliance of Students at the Polls, which is ASAP is the acronym for it. So the students in ASAP sort of stepped back and wondered what would be the best way to proceed in terms of thinking about how law students could serve sort of democratic goals. They really focused in on the aftermath of the 2020 election and the lack of public confidence in how our system of elections is run. And so these days, they're involved in this very large-scale research project that they're coordinating with the ABA Standing Committee on Election Law and a few other organizations to try and create a template for Virginia that tries to explain how elections run and what the various kind of safeguards are included in state election systems. And the idea being that once we complete the Virginia template, that we'll invite schools, students at schools in other states to create a template for their state, working with their state election officials. The idea being that we would be able to provide kind of a compendium of why you should trust election outcomes based on sort of statutory interpretation that students do. So that's ASAP. It's a very ambitious project, but one that the students are really passionate about. We have other programs like Revive My Vote, which helps people in Virginia with felony convictions regain their right to vote. I don't know if Blair and Gray want to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff like Vote Line and other sort of the symposium and other projects that students are engaged with on campus.
I know, well, a big event we do every year is the election law symposium. We normally bring in, prominent practitioners or government officials to talk about normally a pressing issue in election law. At the time, last year we had John Merrill, who is the Alabama Secretary of State, and the plaintiff in Mr. Milligan from Alabama in the case that's before the court now, in Milligan v. Merrill. They came, the lawyers came and they spoke to us about the case and redistricting and stuff like that. And that was a huge get, but that's something that we do every year. I'm sure, I'm not sure, I don't know what the topic will be this year. I have a sneaking suspicion it'll be about ISL, or independent state legislature theory, but we'll let the symposium chairs handle that. In terms of, well, I'll let Gray pick it up.
Only other thing that I would want to throw out there is we do voter registration stuff, and a little bit more involved than just like your typical voter drive, if you want it to be. But those are processes that it's really important to understand kind of at a legal level, because that is where a lot of election law issues sort of stem from, is process. And so, working closely with the county clerk here that processes that kind of stuff, it's pretty invaluable for the kind of hands-on experience piece. I guess other than that, I mean, I'll kind of introduce this. So these terms get a little confusing, but the election law program, which Professor Green chairs, has a number of election law fellows, so like research fellows. And those are really cool opportunities as well to be plugged into the space and get some immediate hands-on experience. So I applied and I'm one of those. And we've done some really cool analysis on state level regulations, so not laws, but even kind of more specific regulations that implement those laws. A lot of untread territory there. And a lot of opportunities to kind of build your endurance and do the like hard, gritty, maybe slightly boring stuff of a lawyer.
Oh, I knew you were going to say this.
No. It's good. It's good. And like everybody wants to come in and you want to do like the big, awesome, you want to save democracy, and like you will, but you got to be like kind of a good lawyer to do that. And a lot of that is like the boring, hard work, and you got to build those muscles while you're in law school. Anyway, those are great ways to get involved as well on research and legal writing right out of the gate. Doesn't really answer your community involvement piece as much, but it is a way to be involved in election law here. Last thing, and it's quick. The undergraduate campus has kind of taken on capital D democracy as like a goal of its. And so they have been investing a lot in student leaders to put on events, community drives, that sort of thing. And we've been doing our best to kind of work with them as well. So again, opportunities to stay plugged in and meet the people who are on the ground running elections and again, processing the paperwork and doing the filings, and understanding that and having people that appreciate the complexity of that is really great.
I have just a question from the admissions angle, which is for our William and Mary graduates. Why did you choose William and Mary Law School?
I chose William and Mary because I toured it and just immediately fell in love with it. I knew that I wanted to do something involving politics around DC, and I had applied to several different law schools in DC, but I knew that William and Mary had a stellar and very renowned election law program. I met Professor Green on my tour, and she just seemed like a wonderful person, and a very naturally curious and eager to teach sort of individual. And Williamsburg in general was just kind of the perfect place to go to law school in my mind. It's a quiet, beautiful historical area. There's stuff around if you want to go do it, but not enough that you're going to be distracted from the dense amount of work that you're going to be doing as a law student. But it was just a really great environment for the mentally exhaustive years I knew that were ahead of me. And I still stand by that decision. It was really great. It's the best decision I made.
I chose William and Mary specifically for the election law program. Before I came to law school, I worked on several campaigns, and I knew I wanted to continue that in some capacity. And as I did my research in terms of schools, William and Mary kept coming up because, like I said before, there's always folks working in that space. And I knew that, I'm from Richmond, so it's pretty close to home, and it's close, not too far away from DC. So plus it's pretty cheap for law school as well, which is a huge factor. So the stars kind of aligned for William and Mary, and I'm glad I'm here.
William and Mary was top of list because of the election law program and the access. Outside of that, I wanted a place that wasn't giant. And I think that was the right move, at least for me, but everyone here knows each other. Everyone here, you can access professors, you can access one another, you can access upperclassmen. And, a lot of law is relationships, and I wish it was somehow a pure meritocracy, but it is simply not. You need to get to know folks, and you need to be plugged into what's going on in any given market at any given time, so you can react appropriately, get your application in on time, et cetera, et cetera. And the bigger you make that, and if you locate it, especially like in major cities, there's a lot of distractions, and there's a whole lot of hubbub and a lot of churn. And something I really value about William and Mary as a law school, again, is it's smaller and it fosters a community that you can kind of get your arms around and connect to. And then, lastly, I think Virginia is actually a really great place to be for a lot of reasons. It's somewhat politically balanced, which makes the election space sort of, I think, more interesting and frankly, kind of flavorful. And William and Mary is well positioned to be, again, not in a major city, but you've got DC that's accessible. You've got the Carolinas that are right there. So I actually really like the location.
We're going to open it up to questions from the audience in about 5 minutes, but I'm going to throw you a question. Election day is coming up. I assume it's just like your favorite holiday or your favorite day of the cycle of the years. What are you going to be watching? What are you going to be looking at? What grabs your interest right now?
Drew, you want to start?
Sure. I'm very interested to see how all of the newly drawn districts perform. There's a term in our line of work called a dummy mander, when sometimes parties try to exert their power a little bit more aggressively than they could, and in the process they draw a district that's not as safe for them. And in years that are not very favorable for them, they could easily end up losing that seat in their pursuit for more. And I'm just anxiously anticipating seeing how they all work out. I'm very curious to see. I don't really have a stake in it myself. I just find it all very curious, and see how effective each state is.
For me, I will say I'm interested to see if the political scientists and mathematicians have kind of figured out how to accurately poll nowadays. Since 2016, I mean, polling is still fairly accurate, but there have been some pretty significant misses. So I'm interested to see if the results will fall into line, roughly about what the polls say, or will we have some huge swings one way or the other. So that'll be something I'm watching.
Mine's somewhat related to Blair's, but do yourself a favor and Google what all are on ballot initiatives for this fall. So things like marijuana, abortion access is going to be on a number of states. And I think that's going to be a really interesting way just to measure, like that's a real poll, right? Is what is the support for X issue in given state? Well, probably roughly what people voted for. And so there's a number of interesting things like that. I'll go even further on the nerddom here. Alabama is redoing its constitution because it has all sorts of unfortunate language, and they have to get that like approved by the voters. And it's an interesting, fun reminder of just like how complicated a 50 state federated system is. I think that stuff is maybe a little less nerve-wracking than if you're really invested in a certain political party. That doesn't always go your way. But
I'm going to be observing in Fulton County on Election Day for the Carter Center. So I will have a sort of up close and personal view, although I'm reading that a lot of voting is happening early. So maybe that'll take some of the pressure off Election Day. At least I hope so. But that's where my mind is going to be.
Interesting. Thank you all. I need to introduce two people who are also on this call, and I'm sorry I didn't do it earlier. Interim Associate Dean for Admissions and Financial Aid, Michelle Rahman, is calling in from the airport, where she has been on the road visiting at fairs and forums and meeting prospective students. Also, Sam Rains is a 1L student here at William & Mary, and he has put this whole program together. So my hat is off to Sam for putting together such a great evening. It's 7:44. Maybe we can open it up to see if we have some questions from the audience. Let's see. Let's see. I don't see any questions at the moment.
We're way too scary.
You're going to have to cold call some people, Professor Green.
Well, one of the questions I get a lot from students is, if I want to practice in the political law field, what do I have to do before law school to kind of get ready for it? And I'm curious how the students and how Drew would respond to that, if what your guidance would be for somebody who's thinking about political law, and wondering if their resume might be lacking something, or how they should think about being prepared for coming to law school with that interest.
Well, I can tell you I wouldn't be concerned about your resume being lacking, because I personally did not do any political work before going to law school, and I was kind of seen as an oddity and a bit confusing to people when I interviewed for jobs, but I just hadn't really ever done it. But that being said, I think that if I had, it would have made it a lot easier to kind of sell yourself and get your foot in the door of different opportunities, rather than having someone with no experience or, involvement in it at all, rather than just my own passing interests. But I don't worry about that, being a disqualifying factor, because clearly it is not. But if I did it again, I definitely would probably bolster it, and just get involved with a campaign that I like, or someone nearby, or just someone to support, just to kind of get a feel for what the ground operations of a campaign really are, rather than just, your academic notions of what it might be like.
Ooh, looks like some questions have popped in.
Yes. One of the questions is advice for students or candidates who are currently applying to law school. I'm assuming that you can think back, especially Gray and Blair, to the kind of whole process. What advice do you have for kind of discerning what school is right for you?
I'll just say focus on fit more than anything else. I know that, when choosing a law school, a lot of folks tend to focus on U.S. News and World Reports, which, I mean, it serves a purpose, whatever that purpose is. But I think that it's really about focusing on, you know yourself, and what kind of environment that you will do well in, and what kind of environment that you probably won't do so well in. And law school is already stressful enough. There's no need to add to that by going somewhere where they're bringing a class of 600 students, and you prefer a more intimate, personal style of learning. So just I would, and cost as well, because it's a very expensive endeavor, but just make sure that you're focusing on some of the things that work well for you, and find some schools that fit that mold.
Yeah, I mean, I might say no one in my family's ever gone to law school. I don't really have a lot of like legal people. Yeah, and there is a uh, culture to like the legal world, and it can be very intimidating and frankly off-putting, I think, if you've not been around folks that kind of speak the language and sort of know like what the firms are up to and how all that world works. And I don't think you need to have that to be successful in law school. I do wish that I had done a little more research, I think, and just familiarizing myself with different broad legal pathways that you can take, whether in this case it's election law or not, and think about where can I get hard legal, real experience while I'm at school. And so what opportunities are there in my immediate community to have an internship during the semester, where I can kind of supplement, a GPA that is not top of my class, or an internship that maybe wasn't a summer internship that wasn't, as much as I wanted it to be. People that come in with a little bit of background knowledge on that and kind of know where to look at, I think really have an advantage, and more power to them. But you can equalize that pretty fast if you just look into, okay, these are my top 5 schools, and then like what's around them, and what opportunities would there be, whether it's at a local court or a federal court if there's one nearby. I wish I had invested a little bit more in that. The question's ambiguous enough, or I'm not sure if you mean like advice on applying and getting in and like figuring that part out. But I'm just going to assume that like you've kind of got that down at this phase, and more about like, how do I possibly make this like never-ending decision? And I know it's really, really hard, but yeah, that would be my answer to that.
Just make sure you keep an open mind. I can count probably on one or two hands the number of people I went to law school with that went in thinking they were going to do something and left doing exactly that. It's a really it's a growth experience that you're going to learn. You're going to find your different interests and what you like and what you don't like, and that also applies to schools themselves. A lot of people have it built up as to they need to go to one school, and that's it. If not, they're not going to be successful. And that isn't the case. Obviously, I want everyone to go to William and Mary if you can, and I want them to want to. But the school that you go to doesn't matter as much as how much you decide to put into it. You can achieve success really regardless of where you go, as long as you just really keep your head down and buckle down.
I'm interested to see there's a student who identifies herself as working in the field of election research. How do you think technology is changing this field over time? And how do you think the role of lawyers in election law will change?
I feel like, Drew, you should jump on that one.
Well, if that's your background, I can tell you that the opportunities for that are only growing. The use of algorithms and simulations in redistricting cases has increased dramatically in the last several years. And based on the way the different courts kind of have an appetite for it, I can only really see that continuing. It's going to be very in flux, and will just really depend on a lot of different new blood and ideas as to how they develop, or how that area and their use in this field of law really develops. But there's going to be a role for them moving forward. As to what that will be specifically, I can't say, but feel encouraged that there is a need for it. There's definitely a need for it, and it comes in on many different aspects of this, not just in redistricting, but also in other voting rights cases and stuff like that. There's a lot of statistical and computer analyses that go into it, and I think that's only going to just continue to be the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting work being done in the election disinformation and misinformation space that relates to sort of algorithmic analysis. There's a huge amount of, especially after 2016, there is a lot of interest in kind of uniting cybersecurity with election law, and some really interesting work being done in that space. And I think we're only at the beginning in terms of thinking about how voting rights plaintiffs can leverage technology to prove their claims. So I think it's definitely, as Drew said, a growth area.
I also can't stress enough the need for technologically literate lawyers in this space, because we are very lacking, myself included. I'm not a technological expert, but so we rely on them very much so. You're welcome to join.
There is a question: do students in the program also do a political law concentration?
Yeah, I can answer that too. So I think it was just before the pandemic that we had the political law concentration approved. And at William and Mary, there are several different concentrations that students can sort of get based on a mix of classes that they take and whether or not they conform to the requirements of that concentration. And it's sort of like a major in college, although a lot less intense. It's not, it's basically just if you take enough classes out of the different buckets that are offered, then you can sort of say that you concentrated in political law. And I should know this, but I actually don't have any idea how many students actually have done the political concentration since we started. I don't know if any of you guys have been pursuing it, but it's not a topic that I actually usually discuss with students. I'm usually much more focused on just making sure that you're getting courses that I think will get you where you're trying to go. So
I know it started for the 1Ls coming in at the end of 2020, because I had worked with you and another professor that is escaping me at the moment.
Maybe Aaron
created. Yes.
Yeah.
Because
that's right.
It made total sense. You guys have a wonderful amount of classes focused on elections and political law. And
I should check into that. I'm not really sure how many people have done it. I don't know if Gray or Blair, you guys have considered doing it, or whether you even knew about it. Kind of curious.
Yeah, I had no idea it existed until this very moment. So
is that right? Well, there you go.
So now I'm too.
Yeah, it hasn't really been promoted that much, now that I think of it.
Yeah, I was aware of it. I don't know that it matters enough to me to not take, business administration or something, something outside of my comfort zone to kind of round things out. It's never been explained to me what its utility is outside of maybe just like a helpful organizer, which I think is valuable, but
Yeah, I think it was sort of two-pronged. I think it was to help guide students who are interested in the field in making sure that they're getting a well-rounded approach to selecting classes. And then I think also it was intended as sort of a signaling effect for employers. But I think my position is probably that the internships and work that you've done in law school is sort of more important than that kind of a certificate approach. But it can't hurt, obviously.
We're soon coming up to 8 o'clock. I'm wondering, panelists, is there anything for our prospective applicants? A question that I didn't ask that you think would be helpful to discuss in this forum?
Jamie, I would, in the midst of the airport, let me just suggest that if anybody would like to pursue some of these questions with me or others, they can request a private Zoom. We'll be happy to answer the questions. I think everybody has done a really good job on explaining exactly what I would have said to them about such things as concentrations and such. The answers are right on. But I'd be happy to meet with anybody who would like to do so, and we can pursue it further.
Great. Is that is our interim associate dean for admissions and financial aid, Michelle Rahman. If you go to our website and type in connect and visit, it'll give you a variety of avenues to get to know William and Mary. One of them is Michelle schedules one-on-one meetings with students. We don't require an interview. This is not an interview structure, but just to talk about your interests and help you discern if we're right for you. We have a number of students who are our student and admission ambassadors who volunteer to correspond with prospective applicants via email. And if you go to that page, student admission ambassadors, we offer a little bit of biographical information. So what part of the country these students are from, what they studied, where they studied, what they do in their free time to help you maybe connect with someone you'd like to talk to. We also have a new blog called This Law School Life by one of our 1Ls, and it has 2 posts so far, one of them about election law. And I'll share that. I can share that with attendees after the program. We also have tours every day at 1 o'clock. And if you give us advance notice by writing lawADM@williamandmary.edu, we'll try to set you up with visiting a class that day or classes, depending on when you're visiting. We are closed the week of Thanksgiving. I should just offer that. If that is it, I don't see any. Oh, I see some thank yous. And that's a perfect opportunity to me to thank Professor Green and Drew, Gray, and Blair for taking this evening to talk to folks in our applicant community about election law and the Election Law Society. That is it, I think, for the evening. This will be posted as a video in a day or two. If you all would like to share it, the attendees would like to share it with anyone. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good night.